A man falls from a window, but the real mystery is not how he died. It's who survives the truth. High in the French Alps, winter wraps itself around a solitary chalet like a quiet accusation. Snow presses against the windows. Silence settles into the wood beams. Inside, a marriage is unraveling in ways that no one else can see. Sandra is a writer. Sharp, controlled, comfortable with ambiguity. She speaks in measured tones, even when provoked. Her husband, Samuel, is also a writer, or, perhaps more accurately, a man circling the idea of being one. Their lives are intertwined with ambition, resentment, and a subtle competition neither fully acknowledges aloud. And then there is Daniel, their young son. Partially sighted, observant in ways that go beyond division. He moves carefully through the world, guided by sound, by tone, by the tremor beneath words. On the day Samuel dies, Daniel is out walking the dog. Snow crunches beneath his boots. The air is thin, almost metallic. When he returns, he finds his father's body sprawled below an upstairs window, blood staining the white like a violent signature. An accident, a suicide, or something else. The authorities arrive with procedural calm. The questions begin softly. Then they sharpen. Sandra says she was inside, listening to music. She says she heard nothing unusual. No cry, no struggle. Just the dull absence of sound that follows catastrophe. But the investigators don't hear what she hears. They hear motive. They hear tension. They hear a marriage strained by disappointment. Because earlier that day, there had been an argument. Not a theatrical explosion. Not shattered glass. Something quieter, more corrosive. Two intellectuals dissecting each other's failures with surgical precision. Samuel accusing Sandra of emotional dominance. Sandra accusing Samuel of inertia. Words spoken not to wound in the moment, but to confirm wounds already festering. And now, those words return recorded. A voice file surfaces. Samuel had secretly recorded their argument. The court plays it back in a sterile room where grief becomes evidence. Every pause is scrutinized. Every inflection stretched thin under legal light. We hear them circle each other. He resents her success. She resents his blame. He suggests she absorbs other people's pain and turns it into literature. She suggests he weaponizes self-pity. It is not simply a marital fight. It is a struggle over authorship of stories, of identity, of suffering. As the trial unfolds, the courtroom becomes less about a fall from a window and more about the anatomy of a relationship. Prosecutors dissect Sandra's personality. They question her bisexuality, her independence, her emotional composure. They imply that her calm is not strength but calculation. The camera of our imagination lingers on her face. She does not collapse. She does not rage. She watches. She listens. Occasionally, she corrects. But composure can look like indifference to those who expect visible grief. The prosecution constructs a narrative. Samuel, depressed but hopeful, pushed to despair by a wife who overshadowed him creatively and emotionally. Or worse that, she killed him in a moment of escalating conflict. Yet there are fractures in that narrative. Samuel had suffered a professional decline after a failed book. He had taken on more domestic responsibility after an accident that injured Daniel years earlier, an accident that he blamed himself for. Guilt had seeped into him slowly, reshaping him from within. His sense of usefulness, of authorship over his own life, was fading. And guilt, when left alone long enough, can become gravitational. Daniel sits through the proceedings with quiet intensity. His world is already shaped by partial darkness. Now it is shaped by uncertainty. Did his mother kill his father, or is she being misunderstood? He replays memories, not visually, but sonically. The cadence of their voices, the weight of their silences, because in this story, sound matters. The thud of a body on snow, the echo of recorded accusations, the slight tremor in Sandra's breath when she insists she is innocent. Witnesses take the stand. A forensic expert reconstructs angles and blood patterns. Could Samuel have jumped, was said. Did he fall accidentally while confronting her? Each expert speaks with confidence. Each conclusion feels provisional, though Court wants certainty, but marriage does not operate on forensic logic. It operates on invisible currents, resentments never fully voiced, ambitions half confessed, compromises quietly tallied over years. One of the most unsettling aspects is not the possibility that Sandra committed murder. It is the possibility that no one can fully know what happened, not even those who were there. In one haunting moment, the prosecution suggests that Sandra used Samuel's vulnerabilities as material for her writing, that she metabolized intimacy into art. The implication is cruel but compelling. If you can narrate pain, can you also manufacture it? Sandra pushes back. She insists that relationships are collaborative fictions. Two people co-writing a life. But what happens when one partner believes the other has taken over the narrative? Daniel becomes the emotional axis of the trial. The defense subtly positions him as the silent witness, not to the fall itself, but to the emotional climate of the home. His testimony could tip the balance, and he knows it. At night he lies awake in the chalet. The house feels altered, as if memory itself has shifted its architecture. He recalls his father's frustration, his mother's cool rationality. He remembers the day of the accident years ago, one that damaged his sight. The guilt that followed, the way Samuel seemed to shrink after that. In the courtroom, Sandra is asked a question that hangs in the air longer than expected. Did you love your husband? She hesitates not, because she does not know, but because the answer is complex. Love, after years of compromise and resentment, is rarely cinematic. It is layered, imperfect, sometimes contradictory. Yes, she says, but it does not satisfy anyone. As the trial intensifies, the focus shifts subtly. It becomes less about proving an act and more about defining a woman. Is she cold? Is she ambitious to the point of cruelty? Is her independence threatening? Jury watches her the way audiences watch characters, in fiction searching for slips, for moments where truth leaks through. Yet truth remains elusive, because perhaps the most dangerous assumption is that every fall must have a clear push. And as part one draws to a close, Daniel begins to experiment with something quiet, almost imperceptible. He conducts a small test of his own in an attempt to understand the psychology of someone standing at the edge. He drops something. He listens. He measures the space between intention and gravity. And in that fragile space, the entire case begins. Daniel does not announce his experiment. He carries it privately, like a fragile object he fears to drop. In the quiet of the chalet, he reconstructs not the fall itself, but the emotional weight that might have preceded it. He watches, listens, measures the small details that could tip understanding from assumption to insight. He remembers his father's guilt. Years earlier, after Danielle's accident that partially damaged his vision, Samuel had internalized responsibility. He had reshaped himself around it, shrinking under the weight of self-reproach, abandoning his creative ambitions, losing faith in his own agency. That guilt had never been confronted. It had silently accumulated, like snow piling against a window. In the courtroom, this quiet dimension begins to surface. The defense carefully frames Samuel's fragility. He had been overwhelmed not to be Sandra, but by himself. His failures, his unrealized potential, his inability to reconcile love with remorse. The argument is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it shifts the narrative from accusation to human complexity. Sandra remains composed. Her calm is precise, deliberate, sometimes misread as coldness. The prosecution amplifies it, implying detachment, calculation, emotional dominance. They suggest that her independence and success somehow explain tragedy. But composure does not equal guilt. Observation does not equal cruelty. Daniel listens. He listens to the cadence of voices, the silence between questions, the way implication can masquerade as truth. When he finally takes the stand, he offers clarity, not through conjecture, but through memory. He recalls his father's frustrations, his mother's insistence, the subtle ways they navigated love and tension. His testimony is honest, layered, and piercingly human. The pivotal moment comes when Daniel recounts a question his father once asked him. If harm is caused unintentionally, can one forgive oneself? It is a philosophical inquiry at the time, now reframed as evidence of Samuel's internal struggle. Not a confession, but a window into the fragile architecture of his mind. Two narratives clash. One, Sandra, as a wife who could not tolerate weakness, whose detachment escalated conflict. The other, Samuel as a man gradually undone by accumulated guilt, by self-judgment, by the invisible erosion of identity over years. The courtroom demands certainty, life, dois. Not. Closing arguments crystallize ambiguity into opposing poles. The prosecution paints Sandra as a calculated figure. The defense situates Samuel's death within a context of accumulated psychological weight. Both plead for the jury to see what no one can fully know: the interior life of a marriage, the invisible fractures of intimacy. The verdict arrives quietly. Not guilty. The words land softly, yet reverberate through every space that witnessed the trial. Sandra exhales, not in triumph, but in relief tinged with exhaustion. Legal innocence does not reconstruct memory, mend loss, or clarify the moment of the fall. It acknowledges uncertainty. Life resumes in fragments. Snow continues to fall over the chalet. Daniel moves with cautious attentiveness. Sandra returns to her writing, and both navigate a world shaped by absence and ambiguity. The film offers no definitive answer about Samuel's final act. It resists closure, suggesting something more unsettling, that we never fully know those closest to us, not because of deceit, but because interior life is inherently inaccessible. In the final moments, Sandra and Daniel share quiet, tentative intimacy. She strokes his hair. He listens to her breathing. No confessions. No revelations. Only survivors learning to inhabit a reality shadowed by ambiguity. The anatomy explored is not of a fall, but of a life shared. The quiet accumulation of resentments, the interplay of ambition and dependence, the subtle fractures love endures, and the indelible weight of guilt. We seek villains because they simplify suffering. But sometimes tragedy is not a single act, it is years of unspoken tension, of remorse. Left unresolved, the story leaves us with a single, lingering question. If we stand at the edge of our own lives, burdened by regret and doubt, would we step back or let gravity take its course? Some falls are physical. Others begin long before the body ever leaves the ground.